At dawn, the school gate was a simple metal door hinged to a wall sunburned the color of millet. By mid-morning it had become a verdict. On the gate hung a notice, a rectangle of paper curling at the corners, stamped twice in violet. Students with arrears will be denied entry. Amina read it with the stillness of someone learning. The weather will not change just because she is kind. 15 years old, she had braided her hair the night before and ironed her shirt with a cooking pot lid because the iron had broken again. She held her exercise books like a shield and stood a breath away from the threshold that divided childhood from shame. The guard shifted, coughed, and looked at the ledger on a crate beside him. Lines ruled in red ink, names nested in debt like fish in a woven net. He pointed to her row. 2 months' fees unpaid. Amina opened her palm, a small pile of coins that clinked like an apology. The guard's finger remained on the line, unmoved. Behind her, other students squeezed through the side opening, their badges catching the light, their breaths quick with gossip. The guard closed the gate. The metal met metal with a sound that swallowed the morning. On the other side, a bell rang. It would be simpler if the world had villains in cloaks and saints with halos, but in Combasiri, where the school leaned into the dust and the wind, the gate was held by ordinary hands. The bursar, Baba Kindo, kept his office like a treasury, safe mounted on the wall, printed receipts pinned to a board with bent nails. He wasn't cruel by intention. He was precise by habit. Fees paid for chalk and paper and the diesel that kept the generator coughing into the night during exam season. The ministry's transfers arrived late, when they arrived at all, and the community fund was a jar on a shelf that had fewer coins each month. He had instructions and a clause to point to. He had numbers to balance that did not care about girls who studied by candlelight or mothers who sold groundnuts from bowls balanced on their heads. When the headmistress asked if they could bend the rule for a week, he gestured at the ledger and tapped the margin where a red stamp read, "For compliance and survival." The stamp was not metaphor. It was a stamp, heavy in his drawer. Inside the compound, the classrooms breathed chalk dust. On the blackboard in Class 9B, the word osmosis was left mid-definition from yesterday. At the teacher's table, Madame Salifou placed her hand on the attendance register and saw an absence circled with a small dot. Amina. She remembered the girl's habit of arriving early and wiping the board before anyone noticed. She remembered the essay on resilience that had made her rub her eyes because it used the word door in 3 different ways, and none of them were about wood. As the period bell chimed, she looked through the louvered window and saw Amina on the other side of the gate, sitting on a low wall, reading a borrowed textbook through the bars as if knowledge could cross metal by sheer will. The guard kept glancing her way, uncomfortable. Children are not supposed to be obstacles, he thought, but he was not allowed to think aloud. Word traveled through markets faster than memos through ministries. By midday, the chatter had thickened in the Tekram WhatsApp group where parents traded second-hand uniforms and warnings about bus fares. A picture appeared. The gate, the notice, and Amina's blue shirt on the other side of the line. No one named names. They spoke in lines of breathless text. Some said rules are rules. Others said rules are broken only at the poor. The headmistress stepped out to the veranda, watched the heat bend the air, and felt the pull of 2 doors within her, the one labeled policy and the one labeled conscience. She walked to the bursar's office and asked for a day. He refused softly and pointed again to the ledger as if it were scripture. She pressed her thumb to the wood of the doorframe and returned to her desk. A teacher in a school that had a gate and a budget and a child in the dust. That evening, as the light went amber, a clip surfaced from a town hall the week before where Ibrahim, the new leader with the soldier's back and the librarian's patience, had spoken about gates, not metaphors. He spoke about literal doors that turned public institutions into private toll booths. He had said, "Breathe first, bill later." The clip ended with his eyes resting on the camera, as if on a human face. Someone forwarded the clip into the Tekram group with a line, "Maybe he meant this." Another parent replied with a prayer emoji. Nobody had imagined that the sentence would walk into their school like a person. Night laid itself flat. Amina's mother counted coins on a mat and came up short. The headmistress drafted a letter to the district office, requesting permission to grant temporary attendance to students with arrears. She promised accountability. She promised it wouldn't become a habit. In the margins, she wrote the names of 6 students, Amina at the top, and set the letter under a paperweight shaped like a fish. The bursar locked his safe and told himself sleep was an audit one performs on one's own soul. The guard set his cap on a nail and traced the gate's edge with a finger, as if to ensure it would hold by morning. The door held. The ledger waited. The breath of the city hung between them. The second dawn brought heat early and a thicker crowd at the gate. Word of the notice had folded into rumor, and rumor has a way of adding weight where there is already strain. Children from the nearby informal settlement lined up with their uniform shirts buttoned to the top, hoping buttons would pass for receipts. Parents gathered in pockets, some with open palms, some with voices sharpened by unpaid wages and rising millet prices. The guard in a pressed khaki shirt positioned his crate, opened the ledger, and ran his finger down the column for 9B. He looked up at each face, and then down at ink, as if he could translate human breath into numbers and back again. Amina arrived, books wrapped in a cloth to keep them clean. She placed them on the wall and greeted the guard with a quiet good morning that made his eyes flicker. He kept his post. Behind the gate, a teacher blew a whistle. It sounded like a bird trapped in a pipe. The bursar stood in the doorway of his office as if guarding a vault that was somehow both empty and priceless. He had spent the night tallying arrears and calculating the cost of letting debt become custom. Slippage, he called it, the slope that turns exceptions into expectations. He had a page with lines, chalk boxes, print cartridges, generator oil math sets for the top 3 classes, exam booklets, stipend for 2 night guards, repairs for broken desk legs. Beside each, numbers. At the bottom, he had written a simple sum that was not simple at all. He believed in the dignity of balances. He believed that an institution must hold its own breath to serve others. Yet he avoided the window because he could not bear the sight of girls turned back. He was not the state. He was a man with a ledge of authority in a building with peeling paint. So he closed the door, which clicked with the soft insistence of a rule being followed. Inside Class 9B, the lesson moved on like rain that falls whether a field is ready or not. Osmosis became photosynthesis. Amina's seat, 3rd row near the window, remained open. Students near the back exchanged messages under the desk, a telegram thread buzzing with small rebellions. Their map of the city included gates and who held them. The headmistress walked the corridor with a clipboard pressed to her chest. She had the letter to the district ready, but the district office was 20 kilometers away, the road half washboard, half pothole. She called the secretary and asked if the driver could leave after assembly. The secretary said the driver's child was sick, and he had taken the day. The headmistress put down the phone like a heavy book, and for the 3rd time that week, felt that systems designed to serve abundance fail differently from those designed to ration lack. By midday, the parents' murmurs had found a rhythm, a mix of indignation and strategy. Auntie Kumba, who sold fried bean cakes by the bus stop, spoke such that her words traveled. She reminded them of the last time the clinic tried to hold patients for lack of cards until a nurse stepped out and said, "Breathe first, bill later." And the clinic had backed down after photographs of wheezing children circulated. She asked the crowd, "Are schools now clinics for money?" A slim man in a faded football jersey retorted that when fuel prices rise, generators die, and chalk doesn't fall from the sky. He pointed at the bursar's office with its board of receipts, each a small flag of compliance. Perhaps both were right. The guard felt sweat collect under his cap. He looked at Amina and imagined his own daughter in a year, 2, with a coin pile that never quite reached the line. Then the headmistress came out with a calm that made voices lower by instinct. She asked Amina to wait on the veranda and took the ledger from the guard's hands, turning the pages with the deliberation of a judge who knows the weight of a finger. She asked the bursar to step outside. He emerged with careful eyes. She said there was a letter on her desk requesting a temporary policy for arrears. He nodded toward his drawer with a stamp. She said she would send it anyway. He said the rule was above both of them. She said so as duty. He almost smiled, pained. In the circle of their debate, time moved, and the school day bled away. Amina read through the bars again, lips moving, paper steady. In the afternoon, a boy from Class 10 filmed a short clip in which Amina explained, without accusation, that she wished to sit for science because plants did not ask for receipts before they drank. The clip had poor audio and a sky that looked like static, but it spread. Someone tagged the municipal radio station. A producer with a taste for stories that put human breath against steel called the school. The headmistress answered and said this was a difficult moment, and could they come tomorrow to record in a manner respectful to students. The producer asked if the gate would be open tomorrow. The headmistress said the policy had not changed. When they hung up, she stood at the window and watched a storm gather like a ledger in the sky. And then a white Toyota pulled up, unremarkable except for its quiet. From it stepped a man in a plain shirt without insignia, and a woman carrying a small notebook with a blue elastic band. The guard straightened, fumbling for dignity. The headmistress recognized them before anyone else did. Ibrahim did not carry an entourage. He carried a reputation for walking into rooms and asking for ledgers. The woman was Mariam, his aide who turned questions into audits. The murmurs pressed into silence, like a crowd inhaling before a plunge. Ibrahim looked at the gate at the notice, at the ledger on the crate, and then at Amina, who rose and stood with modest spine. He said good afternoon as if it were an oath. And then he stepped toward the metal door as if it were an ordinary thing that people make and can therefore unmake. When the leader's hand reached the gate, the guard's instincts outran his training. He moved to unbolt to let authority pass, but Ibrahim rested his palm flat against the warm metal and did not yet move it. He turned to the guard, to the headmistress, to the bursar lurking near his door, and asked a question that came like a breath after a long run. Who decided that this door could breathe only for those who could pay? The question hung in the yard, almost visible. The guard's mouth opened and closed. The headmistress stepped forward with a dignity that did not wobble. She explained the arrears, the delayed transfers, the cost of oil and chalk, the letter drafted and waiting, her fear that bending rules without a replacement rule would snap the whole frame. The bursar held the ledger like a person clinging to the last plank after a boat has taken water. Ibrahim listened without impatience. He asked the bursar to show him the ledger, and Baba approached as if handing over a child. Ibrahim's fingers moved down the pages. He paused at the red stamp, for compliance and survival, and his mouth made a shape that could have been a grimace or a prayer. He asked how many students were denied entry that morning. The headmistress named 6. He asked how much each owed. The numbers were small and also large, depending on what you earned. He asked how often the treasury transfers arrived late. The headmistress said often enough to make begging feel like a skill. Miriam, the aide, wrote in her thin notebook without tearing the page with her pen. She had an ear for evasions and a respect for simple sentences. Ibrahim then spoke to Amina, who had kept quiet because silence sometimes holds more authority than sound. He asked what she had planned to learn today. She said photosynthesis and a poem in French about doors and wind. He folded the ledger, closed with 2 fingers, and returned it to the bursar, as if to say, numbers are real, but breath is more so. He asked the guard for the key. The guard, unsure if he was admitting a person or an idea, handed it over. Ibrahim did not open the gate. He turned to the gathered parents and teachers and spoke without microphone or megaphone. His voice carried the way certain tones carry when a room wants to hear them. He said that gates were made for safety, not for sorting the poor into abandonments. He said, treat first, bill later. He said it without drama, like a clerk reciting a rule everyone should already know. He explained that when someone's breath is at stake in a clinic, a school, a registry where life documents are required to exist, service precedes settlement. He said, I did not come to pay your arrears for you. I came to reorder the line. You will teach first. The system will bill later. And we will build a glass ledger to see who owes what, and who delays what, and why. He named it on the spot. The open gate protocol. Miriam stepped into the shade of the veranda, pulled out her phone, and sent a message to a small working group chat with 8 names and too many acronyms. She wrote the rule in a sentence and asked for a draft directive in 1 page, not 2, with a clause for schools, clinics, and identity windows. She asked for a public metric board template with 3 measured lines: door-to-help minutes, denials in 24H, complaints resolved. She added that the board must be printable on A3 paper and legible from 5 meters because walls do not care for fine print. She asked for a complaints channel that could work on WhatsApp, SMS, and a physical box with a lock. She asked for the ban of any bonus tied to fee collection at the point of access. She asked for a replacement funding path, a per-student access grant wired monthly to schools that kept their open gate scores high. She sent the message. The little check marks did not yet turn blue. She sent it again, just in case. The bursar whispered that promises do not buy diesel. Ibrahim nodded. He said the state would carry its side by making transfers predictable and graded to need. But that beginning today, this school would admit every child and document every debt, with parents offered a schedule and a dignity that would not be mortgaged. He turned to the parents, whose anger had begun to soften into skepticism. He said there would be audits, public ones, and numbers on a board, so that the next time a gate tried to forget it was a door, people could point not to rumor, but to a figure painted in blue. He looked at the headmistress and asked, "Can you hold this line if we hold ours?" She met his gaze like a person receiving a baton in a race she did not know she had agreed to run. She said yes. The word fell and became wait. He placed the key back in the guard's hand. He said, "Open the gate." The guard did, and the metal sighed. Amina stepped through, not triumphal, not apologetic, as if crossing a border that had always been imaginary. Her breath came steady. Behind her, 5 other children followed. The bell rang. It sounded, for once, like a beginning that had remembered itself. Ibrahim did not walk to the headmistress's office, or sit in a chair that made anyone stand. He stood in the yard until the corridor stopped buzzing. He told Miriam to call the district office and ask for all school gates to remain open pending the directive, then to coordinate a training. An embarrassingly simple drill where guards practice opening doors and teachers practice issuing a slip that records admission plus arrears status, while bursars practice not holding anyone at the threshold. He said the drill must fit on one page and require nothing but chalk and a watch. When he left, he did so without siren. The car slid back into traffic and then into rumor. But the sentence had been said out loud in heat and dust in front of a ledger and a door. It would need teeth now, and paper, and a new kind of stamp. The headmistress turned to the bursar and said, "Let's count arrears like oxygen, not like ransom." He did not disagree. He closed the ledger, then opened it again, and began a new column in blue ink. Admitted under open gate. The guard kept the key on his belt, slightly warmer than his skin, aware that an object becomes a symbol the moment someone names it. The directive arrived in 2 days, which in bureaucratic time is a small miracle and in emergency time is a small delay. Miriam had wrung it from offices like water from a stubborn cloth. It arrived with a square seal and a title that fit on a single line. Open Gate Protocol. Treat first, bill later. It covered schools, clinics, registries, and any front desk where a human need meets a counter. The language was plain enough that even the walls could read it. But paper's only breath if someone reads it into a room, so Miriam and a small team came back, not with cameras, but with clipboards. They stood under the neem tree and asked for things that made people nervous. Logs, clauses, chat threads, and the famous ledger. The headmistress showed her letter, now obsolete by a higher rule. The bursar placed the ledger on the table with a polite defiance that said, "You can look, but do not pretend numbers have no needs." The guard leaned on the gate, listening. They discovered what every institution coughs up when asked to show its inside voice. The ledger's red-stamped pages were neat, but there were gaps that opened like missing teeth, payments undocumented because the receipt book had run out last month, fee waivers granted verbally by a previous head before Ramadan and never followed through, a quiet arrangement with a uniform vendor who gave credit at a handsome interest to teachers who then had their wages shaved in whispers. Miriam asked for the WhatsApp thread among administrators. The headmistress did not flinch. She had nothing there to hide. In screenshots, they found panic about treasury delays, a cash flow chart hand-drawn and photographed at midnight, a voice note from a deputy in the district office, advising them to hold firm at the gate to force payments because kindness breeds arrears. Miriam saved the audio with a small frown that suggested a memo would soon have a name on it. On day 3, a mother came in with a crumpled receipt showing half the owed amount paid last term, signed by a temporary clerk who no longer worked at the school. The receipt number did not exist in the ledger. Baba felt insulted by the paper's audacity. He checked the safe where spare books were kept. He found one with 3 leaves missing, the perforations torn unclean. Someone had sold receipts like talismans. The discovery did not shock him. It burdened him. He felt, but did not say, that whenever systems make doors heavy, brokers appear with lighter keys. Miriam logged this under broken mechanism, perverse incentive at point of access, plus unauthorized receipt issuance. She drew arrows from those words to 2 words written large, ban bonuses. She then drew another arrow to peer student access grant and underlined it as if carving a small road on a map. The radio station sent a reporter who asked more interesting questions than expected. He asked what the door-to-help minutes were before the protocol and after. He asked how many denials had been recorded in the last 24 hours. He looked at the board they had hung near the gate, a laminated sheet with big black strokes. The first line read 2 minutes average. The second read 0 denials. The third read 3 complaints, all resolved, and he asked to see how those were resolved. The headmistress produced the complaint slips. One was a father who said the guard had spoken harshly. The guard had apologized, and the father had written accepted with a thumbprint. Another was a mother asking for clarification on the repayment schedule. The bursar had issued a simple, stamped plan. The third was from a student who liked that teachers greeted at the gate now. It was not a complaint, but a thank you, and had been pinned to the board with a bright paper clip. The reporter nodded, disappointed only that drama was thinning into procedure. In the district office, the deputy smiled with a tightness that warned. He complained to a colleague that the leader was grandstanding. Policies had clauses, funds had chains. He suggested quietly to a procurement friend that a new compliance stamp could be printed and sold to schools to signify open gate adherence, turning the rule into a sticker market. The friend forwarded the idea to a telegram channel that sniffed opportunities like dogs sniff meat. Within 48 hours, a man with a briefcase was visiting school administrators offering laminated protocol compliance placards for a small fee. A math teacher bought one out of fear. The headmistress tore it up when she saw it on the wall because the real board with real numbers had made her allergic to false certificates. She called Miriam. The aide's voice went colder than shade. She sent an alert to the inspectorate and asked for a sting that would be gentle where ignorance was at fault and sharp where profit was the motive. She added a line to the directive. No third-party marks permitted. Only official boards with traceable QR codes. A small thing, but in systems, small things are hinges. Baba met Miriam at the veranda rail late one afternoon. He confessed his worry that the per-student grant, if it came, would not come on time, because money has a way of taking detours on the road. Miriam did not pretend optimism. She sketched out the accountability flow in 4 simple steps. Attendance uploaded by teachers via USSD at day's end. Daily gate board photo auto-stamped and sent to district. Treasury initiates. Transfers weekly based on attendance with arrears tracked, but not weaponized. Schools publish their open gate scores monthly, and parents sign off with thumbprints or signatures at a brief Saturday meeting. She added that an external civic group would be invited to audit 3 randomly selected schools monthly and publish findings on a public site that did not require passwords. She said prosecutions would be for those who sold access as goods. She said culture checks would be conducted by quietly asking 3 questions at the gate. How long did you wait? Did anyone ask for money at the door? And do you know how to complain? If 2 of 3 answers failed, the district head would be summoned with 10 days to correct or be moved. It sounded severe. It was also simple. The investigation widened and then narrowed. It named not villains, but incentives. Not one bad actor, but a lattice of small expediencies that, woven together, had made a door forget its purpose. At the end of the week, Miriam held a press briefing in the shade of the neem tree. She did not cast blame like confetti. She explained the broken mechanism in short sentences. She praised the headmistress for the letter she had written before any directive existed. She thanked Baba for opening the ledger without being asked twice. She commended the guard for how he now greeted each child as if each were a receipt for the social contract. She announced 2 disciplinary measures for the receipt vendor and the deputy who had advised weaponized denial. She lifted the laminated board and held it up, and under the sun its numbers looked like promises that had learned to wear uniforms. Systems do not change because someone makes a speech. They change because thousands of small things are pointed in the same direction and then nudged daily. The first nudge was the training drill. It arrived on a single sheet entitled Open Gate Drill, 2 minutes to welcome. Guards practiced it under the sun, watches in hand. Step 1, greet. Step 2, ask for name and class, record in the daybook. Step 3, if arrears exist, issue an admission slip with arrears noted. Send parent to bursar after the first period, not before. Step 4, open. In the corner of the sheet, a motto was printed in small type, breath before billing. Teachers received their own drill, update attendance by USSD at noon and day's end, note any denials as violations to be reported. Bursars had a drill too, set repayment plan in conversation, not confrontation. Print schedule, stamp. Enter into ledger column for open gate admissions. Update arrears, dashboard on Fridays. Never tie personal evaluations to cash collected. Headmistresses had one obligation printed in bold, keep the board honest. The per-student access grant began to flow, not perfectly, but reliably enough to form a habit. Treasury wired on Wednesdays and posted a public list by Friday with resolved transfers in green, delayed in amber, flagged in red, department heads' names beside each color. The first month, the amber band was fat. Miriam visited the Treasury and asked why. She heard about batch files and signatories on travel. She returned with Ibrahim 2 mornings later. He stood by a desk surrounded by wires and asked an IT clerk to build a queue timer on the internal transfer system that would shame delays with a ticking line under each school's name. He did not raise his voice. He raised a metric. 2 weeks later, the amber slimmed to a belt. At the school, the board had become a ritual. The guard now opened the gate with a practiced swing. He greeted each student by name. The first line of the board hovered near 2 minutes. On a bad day, it rose to 5 when the guard had to explain the protocol to a new parent. Baba developed a rhythm, meeting parents after first period in the shade, calculating what was fair. He turned away 2 offers of something extra to accelerate a stamp, and reported both to the headmistress, who recorded them as incidents and praised him in the staff meeting for turning temptation into training material. The staff meetings grew subtler. They learned to celebrate the ordinary. No denials today. 3 repayment plans set without raised voices. A child who once hovered at the gate now entered with 2 friends, laughing. The complaints channel handled noise and signal. The WhatsApp line received a daily trickle of messages, a teacher's tone, a guard's boundary, a bursar's math. Each received a response within the 72-hour SLA printed on the board. A volunteer parent committee, with Auntie Kumba prominent and firm, reviewed the log each Saturday. They brewed tea and read aloud the week's entries and made sure none were shelved with excuses. When the reporter returned, bored for drama and soothed by competence, he found the board uninteresting. He tried to provoke a quote about the leader's brilliance. The headmistress said the rule is good. We are trying to be good too. It was not a headline. It was a habit. He asked a student what had changed. The boy said, "We breathe and then we pay." The choice of verb told a story. For all the quiet progress, teeth were still needed. The inspectorate led 2 prosecutions for selling laminated compliance placards. The deputy who had advised gate denials was reassigned to a post where his job was to audit complaint responses, a form of poetic justice that was not cruel, only educational. A memo went out confirming the ban on any gate-based bonus, replaced by an incentive for schools with low door-to-help times and high repayment plan adherence without denial incidents. The logic was explained on a radio show with Ibrahim answering questions for 40 minutes, voice steady, crediting clerks and guards by name rather than himself. He said, "What matters is not my signature. It is the angle of the door." Miriam introduced a monthly culture check disguised as a conversation. She, or someone she deputized, would visit a random school, lean on the gatepost, and talk. "How is your breath here?" she would ask the first person she saw. The answers were not poetry, but they indicated whether the rule was becoming a reflex. In Combasiri, the answer became a smile and a mention of the board and how it moved down and up like a pulse. The board's QR code, when scanned, opened a page with 3 graphs and a button that said Lodge Complaint. Even those without smartphones learned to ask their neighbor to check, turning the private phone into a public square. There were stumbles. One afternoon, in a neighboring ward, a headmaster tried to implement a soft denial by seating arrears students under a tree outside the classroom. It was almost a gate, and therefore had to be treated as one. A photograph reached Miriam before the dust on the ground had settled. She called the headmaster and asked him to read the first line of the protocol into the phone. He did, quietly. She said, "Then you know this is wrong." He agreed. He moved the students inside and apologized in front of them, which was both costly and necessary. The photograph was replaced the next day by one of a classroom where a tree's shadow lay across the desks, like a long breath, and nobody sat outside it. When the month closed, the school held a small assembly, not to celebrate a person, but to demonstrate the board. The headmistress explained the 3 lines. The guard explained his watch. Baba explained the ledger's new column, now neat in blue ink. Amina recited the French poem about doors and wind, and it sounded less like metaphor and more like inventory. At the back, Ibrahim stood a moment in the shade, unannounced. He did not wave. He watched the system do what it had been told to do, and in his pocket he carried nothing but the knowledge of hectares of gates still to visit. He slipped away before the applause, which was not for him, but for the boredom of good procedure. In the months that followed, the protocol stopped being a story and started being furniture. Useful, unremarked, missed only if removed. The gate's paint flaked and was repainted a quieter blue. The laminated board acquired thumbprints on its edges from hands, adjusting it each morning. The ledger thickened another centimeter on its shelf, its new column filling with repayment plans that read like promises made in kitchens and kept in small, sturdy installments. The phrase "breathe" before billing migrated into other rooms. At the clinic, the receptionist began to place the blood pressure cuff on an arm before reaching for the file. At the registry, the clerk printed the birth certificate and said, "Come back with the fee by Friday," and the mother cried for a second and then laughed because crying had become rarer. At the bus depot, a volunteer painted an old door frame across the entrance to the ticket office and wrote on it, in chalk that washed off each rain, "Open Gate." Amina passed her science exam with a quiet pride that made her mother cover her mouth. She still could not pay all at once. She paid in halves, and then in halves of those halves, and the ledger's blue line beside her name moved like a river losing its floodwater after the rains. She began to tutor 2 younger students under the neem tree, sketching leaves and stomata in the dust with a stick. She preferred the tree to the classroom sometimes. The guard would watch from his post. He had learned to cherish the first 2 minutes, the ritual of names and eyes, and the gate swung open. He would time himself even when nobody was watching, as if proving that speed could be gentle. Baba changed in ways he would not have predicted. He became a storyteller of rules, explaining the protocol to visiting bursars from other schools, with a controlled warmth that was not evangelism, but pride. He still loved the feel of a balanced page, but he learned that a balanced page grows out of a balanced threshold. He no longer needed the red stamp for survival. He used a blue stamp for admission, a small circle that looked less like denial and more like a wave. On his wall, he hung a weekly transfer printout where the red and amber had slimmed and the green had learned to stand taller. When a transfer delayed, he did not panic. He logged, notified, and showed the log to any parent who asked, turning suspicion into co-monitoring. Miriam moved on to other gates, other boards. She carried the same thin notebook with the blue elastic banded and wrote the same small questions under different neem trees. She kept a calendar for culture checks, and at the bottom of each month, she wrote the same sentence in different contexts. The door did not forget, it is a door. Ibrahim kept his habits too. He visited a school without notice and asked a single question at the gate. He checked a clinics board and stood by the generator to see if the grant had arrived. He called the treasury clerk by name and thanked him when the queue timer showed a line that ticked in seconds, not days. He spoke rarely on radio now. He preferred numbers on walls. Authority can be loud or accurate. He chose the second. The reporter who had wanted drama found himself filing a piece about how nothing happened at the gate anymore. He wrote that the board was always within 5% of its target, that complaints were registered and closed with a boring regularity, that the deputy had learned to audit responses with a seriousness that made his earlier advice sound like someone else. The editor nearly killed the story for lack of spice, but ran it in a corner with a small photo of a board, a key, and a child's hand on a backpack strap. It was not shared widely. It did not need to be. The words migrated even further. In a transit office where drivers once slipped cash to secure early inspection, a laminated sign appeared. Open gate applied here. Inspect first, bill later. In a housing counter, where a widow had waited a week for a document to release her from a long grief, the clerk, freshly trained, issued it in 20 minutes and stapled to it a repayment schedule that did not choke. The widow blinked, then sat on a bench and breathed. The word breath had turned from metaphor into metric into culture, and culture is the hardest door to open and the sweetest to walk through. Across the city, the blue boards remained visible. They faded slightly under sun and were replaced without ceremony. Children grew into the protocol without memory of its absence, like citizens born after a war who can't imagine steel on the streets. The gate kept swinging. In a staff meeting 1 year later, the headmistress read the numbers and found there was not much to say. She thanked the guard and the bursar and the parents' committee and dismissed them early. People lingered anyway, under the neem, chatting about rain and prices and children who had learned to pronounce stomata. Ibrahim passed by that day on his way elsewhere and did not turn in. He did not need to. He could see from the road the board's 3 lines, steady as lungs. He breathed once, satisfied, then went on to the next door that still thought it was a wall. As the credits breathe out, remember, gates become doors when ordinary people hold the line. If this story moved you, help it travel. If you liked the video, then like, share, comment, and subscribe.